Greetings, and welcome back to a Sappho Academic. I got a quick video for everybody. Now, just to give a little bit of context on how I decided to do this video, in light of recent humiliations in the Black manosphere with a certain content creator doing a certain interview, the name Thomas Sowell comes up over and over again. And I see it's more apparent now than ever to start debunking Thomas Sowell, right? Because Thomas Sowell is the one that Black conservatives run to try and make it seem like enslavement of Black people in America was not a big deal or wasn't as big as we want to make it out to be. And they continue to use these points even with the reparations conversation. So this video is going to be quick. It's going to be the origins of white privilege, because while I'm doing the research on Thomas Sowell, I came across this. And now this is not going to say directly that this is the origin of white privilege, but what it says here is the perfect example and the perfect origin point to highlight exactly the mentality of white privilege. You can have all these academic answers, you could have all these activist answers, but to the core, this is where the mentality stems from. This is the origin. If Black people can pass down trauma from generation to generation, then superior attitudes can be passed down from generation to generation. If the trauma could be passed down, then the nationalist attitude could be passed down from generation to generation. That superiority that we see both in the Democrats and the Republicans. So without further ado, this is the origin of white privilege. I'm not going to read all of it. So by 1830, slavery was primarily located in the South, where it existed in many different forms. African Americans were enslaved on small farms, large plantations, in cities and towns, inside homes, out in the fields, and in industry and transportation. So we're going to skip these two paragraphs and come over here. The standard image of Southern slavery is that of a large plantation with hundreds of slaves. In fact, such situations were rare. Fully three-fourths of Southern whites did not even own slaves. I repeat, only 1/4 of Southern whites owned slaves. 3/4 of Southern whites did not own slaves. That means only a quarter, 25%, owned slaves. So out of the 25% that owned slaves in the South, out of the 25% that owned slaves in the South, 88% owned 20 or fewer. So 88% of that 25% owned 20 or fewer. So we're gonna do some quick maths right here, okay? So 25 times, this is 88%. So 22, only 22% of the quarter of whites who owned slaves. So remember, 25% here of whites owned slaves, and only 88% had 20 or fewer. This is 22%, right? So quick maths. So we broke down the numbers, right? So what does this have to do with white privilege? Well, here it is. Whites who did not own slaves were primarily yeoman farmers. Practically speaking, the institution of slavery did not help these people. And yet, most non-slaveholding white Southerners identified with and defended the institution of slavery. Most of the 75% who did not own slaves agreed with slavery despite not making any profits from it, right? Though, we're continuing on, though many resented the wealth and power of the large slaveholders, they aspired to own slaves themselves and to join their privileged ranks. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, this is the origin of white privilege. Just because many white people are not part of the 1%, the 10%, that does not mean they don't aspire to be part of the 1 and 10% today. It's not different than what was going on back then. Many Republicans, conservatives would like to say, oh, my ancestors didn't own any slaves, da 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 da. But the ones that did not own slaves, the majority still agreed with the practice and they wanted to become part of the institution. And that's not all. They want to join the privileged ranks. In addition, slavery gave the farmers a group of people to feel superior to. And I repeat, in addition, slavery gave the farmers a group of people to feel superior to. They may have been poor, but they were not slaves and they were not black. They may have been poor, but they were not slaves and they were not black. They gained a sense of power simply by being white. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the origin of white privilege. Everything you heard from the activists, from the scholars, this is where it comes from. So, to the people that say their ancestors were not slaveholders, that may be true, but that doesn't mean that they were working to abolish it during their time as well too. Most likely they agreed with the practice. Most likely they agreed with the practice and aspired to be part of the privileged ranks. So that's all I have for the origin of white privilege. It's very simple. It's very simple. Very easy to understand. It's in black and white. 75% of Southern whites at the time, talking about 1830, 75% did not own slaves. Only 22% of the ones who did own slaves only had 20 or fewer. That really shouldn't be a distinction at all, but it does show a diversity in the number. It doesn't really matter, but it does show some type of diversity. It does show, as we said here, that it wasn't just large plantations, but many lived in cities, towns, inside homes, out on fields, in the industry and transportation as well too. But the main thing I want people to take away is that the majority who did not own it still agreed with it, even though they didn't profit from it. So we're going to go to the resource bank here. We see all these different topics, which I was just in. Antebellum slavery. So this was a period in the South, right? And I'm going to get into that in my other videos, but we see all the different sources that we can click on and we can cross-reference. But let's go all the way down, or sorry, these are all the different topics. I'm sorry, these are all the different topics. The sources are down here in the bibliography. So let's click the bibliography. These are all the different books used to collect the information on the entire site. So all these topics that we just seen here, right, all stem from this bibliography list. And I'm sure if you picked any random one right here, soul, murder, and slavery, we'll just search the title, see what pops up. Right? So we get the book by Neil Irvin or Nell Irvin, right? Nell Irvin painter, right? So I mean it'll take a very long time to cross-reference, but the bibliography is there, the information is set. So that's all I really wanted to show because as I was reading this, I'm like, this is it right here. This is white privilege in a nutshell, perfectly explained in a historical context, and it extends to what we see today. Many people say, oh, but I'm not racist. I'm not a white supremacist. I don't believe in anti-black, systematic anti-blackness. So the white privilege, yes, they definitely privilege from it. But how many of these people actually agree with it? And the ones who don't agree with it, how many are actually fighting to dismantle it? I would say a very small number. But that's it. Hopefully, it was broken down completely for you to understand this term white privilege. Maybe you've heard it before, but now you could see it in a historical context with or without the reality of enslavement today, because that same mindset is still there today. So that's all I wanted to say. Stay tuned for my next videos on Thomas Sowell, and peace out.